Rosalind Benjet. I'm from the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. Today is June 7th, 2002, and I'm going to be speaking today with Simon Sargon at his home in Dallas. And we're going to begin. Simon, you were born in India to Jewish parents.
That's right. I was born in Bombay in 1938, and my father's family had lived in India, as far as we can ascertain, for about 300 years. They originated in Cochin, which is the south of Bombay, about 600 miles, and my grandfather had moved from Cochin to Bombay. My mother's family was of Russian origin, so she was, her father came from Pinsk and came to Manhattan with the great wave of Jewish immigration in the 1880s. And then she was visiting her father, who had retired to Tiberias, one of the four holy cities of Israel, on his retirement. And my father, who had been studying law in London, was coming back through Palestine to go back to Bombay to set up a law practice. So they happened to meet in Jerusalem, and 6 weeks later, they were married. And my mother turned around, this New York girl, and headed off to Bombay and set up a home there. So it's a rather romantic, exotic kind of story.
Do you remember anything about Bombay?
I have one fleeting memory of a doorstep, which I think is my uncle's home there, but otherwise, no, I was one, my brother was three, and we came back to the States. It was the last ship that was allowed through the Suez Canal in 1939, before it closed with the war. So my mother wanted us to be brought up here in America. She was homesick and she wanted to come back.
And where did your family settle when they came back?
Well, various places. We started in New York. We lived in the Bronx for a while, and then we moved to Washington, D.C. My father took a job with the OPA, the Office of Price Administration, that was active during the Second World War. And then when the war ended, we moved to Boston, and that's where I was raised, more or less. I say when the war ended. I mean, this was the Second World War.
Yes.
This is 45. Some of your listeners or watchers, maybe this is ancient history.
And where did you go to school then?
Well, I went to Winthrop High School, which is a small suburb of Boston, and then to Brandeis University, and I was studying Hebrew at Boston's Hebrew College and music at the Longy School in Cambridge.
Tell us how you started your music education.
Well, it started in Washington. I had gone to a recital of some friends of mine. I was 6 years old. It was a piano recital, and I heard them play, and I wanted to play too. So my parents bought me a little piano, and I started piano lessons. And then I started writing. As soon as I could play, I started writing down little melodies.
And you continued doing this?
Oh yes, I continued, and then in Boston very seriously. And then when I was at Brandeis, I commuted into New York for lessons and piano lessons and so forth. So it was very intensive.
Was your family religious? Did they attend synagogue?
Yes, my father was very religious, and his whole family was very observant. They were Sephardim, and there was no Sephardic community per se in Boston, so he regretted that a great deal. But whenever we went to New York to visit my New York relatives, he was up and off to the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue on 70th and Central Park West. And I used to accompany him to some of those services too. I remember hearing they had a wonderful male choir. I was impressed by the music, and the beam, of course, was in the center, and the rabbi was the cantor. And the chanting, it was quite a bit different from what I was used to. We attended an Orthodox congregation in Winthrop with a wonderful chazan who had a beautiful tenor voice, and of course no choir or anything. That was the music, but he was a wonderful singer.
And how did your family celebrate Jewish holidays?
Well, we we celebrated mostly in the Ashkenazic tradition because that's was what was around us. Um, Passover, we used to go to New York to be with my mother's sister and her family. We had a huge Seder there with all her brothers and sisters. And the high holidays were wonderful in Winthrop because we were right on the ocean. And I remember one high holidays, we had these northeasters that used to sweep in from the ocean. One, it was late September, and there was this huge storm, and they had built a seawall. But the synagogue was 1 block away from the ocean, and the waves came crashing over the seawall and rolled down this, which was a decline. And when we went to come out of the services from Rosh Hashanah, you couldn't come down. It's a long flight of steps from the entrance to the synagogue. Well, nobody could go out because it was all flooded. There was a foot of water, and so we all had to go back up and go out the back exit of the synagogue. But I mean, it was right. It's a time of impressive, great, majestic things. So why not have these huge 30-foot waves crashing and this slamming against the wall with that thunder and the water coursing down those streets. I mean, it was wonderful to come out to it. I'll never forget that.
Now, your graduate work was in composition.
Yes, I studied at Brandeis with Irving Fine and Harold Shapiro, and then went on to Juilliard. I worked with Vincent Persichetti, and during the summer in Aspen, I was with Darius Milhaud, who, as many of your listeners or viewers may know, was a Sephardic Jew from the south of France, and a wonderful man. At the time I knew him, he was crippled and confined to a wheelchair, but he had this wonderful sense of humor and lightness about him, and I respected and admired him so much because he had this indomitable will, you could see, even though physically he was incapacitated.
Now, when did you become interested in Jewish liturgical music? Was it at that point?
No, I always was. I was very moved, as I said, by our cantor singing in the shul. And it really touched me, and I was very honored. He was a man in his 50s, 60s. I was a boy of 12, 13. He asked me to accompany him on some of his concerts of Jewish music. So I was playing all of his Jewish liturgical repertoire that had been arranged for piano accompaniment. And at the same time, studying in Hebrew school, we sang all of the songs, and of course at home we sang all of the holiday songs on the holidays. And then for 3 summers I went to Hebrew camp up in New Hampshire. It was Camp Yavne, which was run by the Hebrew College. And then that was an intensive kind of submersion in all things Israeli. And we sang Israeli folk songs, and of course the holidays were, in the summer you don't have that many holidays, but I remember Tisha B'Av when we sat on the floor with candles, and every Shabbat was Orthodox Shabbat, everything stopped. And the singing in the dining room, the Chadar Ochel, after every meal, the grace after meals, and then songs, especially Shabbat. So I was, just inundated with the Jewish music, liturgical, folk, all kinds.
How does the process of composing work?
How does it work?
What happens when you write a new composition?
One can only speak personally, because I know it's very different for every creator. For me, it would depend if it's a text that I'm setting, in which case usually the words suggest a musical motive, the opening pattern of words. And from there, I continue that motive as the poem or the text goes on. Now, a lot of texts don't speak to me that way. They just, it's a funny combination of the rhythm of the words, the sound of them, and then the mood that the sound of the words create. And the fire doesn't happen all the time. That's like with the Psalm 29. I searched and searched for something, and finally that psalm just took off for me. But not every psalm does. Some of them you read and reread and it doesn't come. If it's an instrumental piece, it's generally from an idea that somehow comes into my mind. Where it comes from is a mystery. I think it's from God, and composing for me is a very spiritual activity because, in a sense, I find it frightening. I find looking at a blank page very frightening when it has to be filled with black notes, and I'll do anything to postpone starting that. But I find that meditation and prayer help me a great deal. And even when I'm having blocks or I'm stuck, I'll take time out and pray about those too, so that I always feel like I can't overcome those myself. I need something beyond me to help me do that.
Now, what happens then between the actual writing and the performing
Well,
composition?
there are a lot of steps. Once the piece is written, in a sense, that work is over for me. But the main thing is that it should come alive in sound and reach other people, because that's the whole point of it all. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. I was lucky at the temple. I had a great choir, and as I wrote music, I was free to program it, and the temple gave me the wherewithal to arrange for the copying and reproduction of the music, which is costly. Every new premiere, people don't factor in all of those expenses beyond just the creation of the work. So the temple assisted me in that, and I'll always be grateful for that. So my liturgical music has been widely performed. Often things premiered at the temple have spread around the country and been used in synagogues and throughout the country. The non-liturgical, non-sacred music usually gets started with one performer who will present it. For instance, I wrote a piece for clarinet called Klezmusik, and it's a concert piece, but it incorporates elements of klezmer style for a concert clarinetist. It's quite virtuosic and difficult, but a lot of fun and very impressive. Well, the clarinetists who've played it have played it at clarinet conventions, and so it's heard by other clarinetists, and then I get requests coming in. It's not published, but I get requests coming in for copies, and I know it's been done in England, and it's been done in New Orleans at the Clarinet Fest there, and all, just it goes around because it's a small world of clarinetists and looking for repertoire all the time. And that's similar with, with the flute pieces and the violin pieces and so on and so forth.
How does this differ from commissions?
Commissions is when an individual or an institution will say, will you write a piece for us for such an occasion, and it has to be due by, and it's for such and such. These are your musical forces that are available to you. So the parameters are given to you by the commissioning organization usually. Whereas if you just write what you want to write, you're wide open, You set it for whatever you want, as long as you want, and take as long as you want to write it. It doesn't matter. But of course, then you may never hear it because it may never get performed. Harriet knows all of this very well from a literary standpoint, I know. But it's the same parallel, I think.
Wouldn't some commissions be different than others? In other words, somebody might say, would you put a certain psalm to music?
That's right.
Or would you write a composition for
That's
this
exactly
event?
right. Yes, for instance, there was a volunteer choir in Indiana, in Fort Wayne, which is a very small Jewish community, but they had, surprisingly enough, an a cappella, non-accompanied choir of about 12 singers who were extremely devoted to their singing. They sang Shabbat, they had a summer retreat, and they sang. Well, they commissioned, they knew exactly what they wanted. It was a setting of the poem, the prayer Ritzay from Friday night. They wanted it for unaccompanied choir. It had to be something that amateur singers could learn. It couldn't be too difficult or too dissonant or whatever. And it had to be ready so it could be performed for the next high holiday. So, there it was all laid out for me. That was it. Whereas when the temple commissioned my farewell piece, they said, write a piece for the choir. And that was it. Mm-hmm. So that's why I wanted to write something doable, practical, and yet something a little different from the normal organ chorus piece. That's why I introduced the timpani, which gave it a little bit of special feeling,
And we're told that your latest commission has been given by Yale University. Can you tell
Well,
us
oh
about
no,
that?
I'm sorry, that's not the latest.
No.
That was a few years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but that's okay. Yeah, they had a international seminar on the Psalms of the Hebrew Bible, and invited scholars from all over the country and the world to speak about the Psalter and the Psalm in the Jewish tradition and in the Christian tradition. And as part of that, they commissioned a Christian composer and myself to represent the Jewish tradition. Now there they had asked that we both do the same psalm, and I was supposed to do it in Hebrew and he was supposed to do it in English. It was Psalm 67. Well, it was one of those psalms I could not, for the life of me, get anything going with. And I was so heartened because when I finally spoke to the organizer, she said, well, the other composer didn't care to set Psalm 67, so he said Psalm 1. So I said, well, if he didn't set it, I'm not going to set it. I said, I'm setting Psalm 8. So that's how we did it. And it's too bad in a way. It really is too bad, because it would have been very instructive to see how a Christian and a Jew approach different words, different psalm. For instance, Psalm 1, as you know, is in Hebrew, Ashrei Ha'ish. Blessed is the one who does not walk in the path of the wicked. But the word is Ashrei in Hebrew. Ashrei, usually blessed, is Baruch. Ashrei connotes Osher, which is happiness, prosperity, well-being, in addition to being blessed. This all comes to the man who doesn't follow in the paths of the scornful or the wicked. Well, if I had said the word Ashrei, I would not have said it the way he said the word blessed, because he said blessed, blessed. It was like the saints are blessed, And it was a very Christian approach to text. Valid from his point of view, because he doesn't know Ashrei from Adam, But a Jewish person who understands Hebrew can't set the word Ashrei the way you set the way Baruch. And it would have been interesting to the audience to have had that discussed and revealed,
So tell us about the latest commission.
The latest commission. Well, the last commission I just completed was for a piano quartet, piano, violin, viola, and cello. I think it will be premiered by Voices of Change next year. I hope so.
And you've also been a teacher for many years.
Yes.
Can you tell us something about what your experiences have been like as a teacher?
I love to teach, and my teaching has been teaching even when I'm not in front of a classroom, as the choir knows, because I get involved in teaching words, interpretation, and it becomes an educational thing to run a choir rehearsal. It's musical and education. And before I taught, I always taught somehow. Sunday school, when I was going to Juilliard, I taught at a temple in Manhattan, and then I taught at Sarah Lawrence College in New York, and at a Catholic school, Marymount College. And then I went to Israel. I taught at the Reuben Academy and also at the Hebrew University. But then I came back here to the States, and I had the temple job, in which I really didn't have a teaching job. It was working with the choir, the junior choir, doing some adult education. But in '84, when I joined SMU faculty, then I started teaching once again as a professor-type teacher. But I enjoy it very much, and I find it challenging and stimulating, and I like to be involved with young people, especially now at this point in my life. I find it an invigorating thing, and take great pleasure in making them excited about music and getting rid of the jaded working for grades mentality, and just get back to basic. I'm in music because I love it. I can't do anything else. This is what gives me joy in my life,
Have you worked mainly with music majors or all
Both.
students?
Both. For years I gave not courses, but I gave lectures before the Dallas Symphony concerts on the stage of Fair Park. I would discuss one of the pieces that the symphony was going to play that evening, and also lectures for the Dallas Opera. I called them opera logs, and I would go through the opera and discuss character, plot, motivation, use of musical motives, and so forth. And that was like adult education because these were not professional musicians, but an audience that really wanted more, and they were wonderful. And I love that too. I mean, you know, it's the same thing. As long as the excitement about music can be communicated and the beauty of it can be enhanced by people understanding more deeply the intellectual basis, the logical basis of it, then that gives me great satisfaction.
When you came to Dallas in 1974,
Yes.
what were your impressions of the city at that time?
This is for the Historical Society.
Yes. It's okay.
Well, it was not my first visit to Dallas, actually. I had been here twice before. I was a New York snob, or an Eastern snob, you know. Anything west of the Hudson was
You dropped off the side of the
dropped off the side of the ocean. In fact, when I was at Juilliard looking for a job, there was a job posting at the University of Texas, and I thought, God, what an outpost. And I looked it up in the book and found there were 45,000 students. I was astounded. But I had been accompanying Jenny Turrell, who was a marvelous singer, concert singer, opera singer, and she gave a concert here in Dallas at McFarland in '63 for the Civic Music Series, and I played for that. And then she came back next year and did a concert in Fort Worth at Landreth for their university concert series. So I had been down here, and she was, John Ardorn worshipped her, and he took us both out to lunch and to Neiman's and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But it was just a very brief stay. And when we came to Dallas in '74, it was a vastly different city from what it is now. It was so much more of a small, townish, provincial, the city where Kennedy got shot kind of thing. You know, it didn't have the megalopolis and the sophistication in terms of the restaurants, the stores, and everything else, more international feeling that it has now. It was, curiously enough, on the very same latitude as Jerusalem. I don't know if people are aware of that. So we came from Jerusalem, and the difference climate-wise was that there's no rainy season, dry season here, but the heat and the humidity were on a par. Jerusalem's a little better, it's in the mountains, but if you're in Tel Aviv. So it took some acclimatization to get used to Dallas, especially having lived in New York and Boston my whole life when I lived in this country. Then we went to Jerusalem for 3 years, and when we came back, it was like coming back to a different country, you know, because it was not the East Coast that I knew. But in a way that was very good for us, and we were so happy to raise Olivia in a healthy environment here, you know, physically healthy and have some space. And it was a good city for all of us. We were very lucky that somehow we were placed here.
How do you think the city has changed, other than superficially with restaurants, etc.?
I think that it's much more diverse. There's an underlying diversity that there never used to be. You know, it was overwhelmingly Bible buckled Christian when I came, or at least that was the impression, because that's what surrounded you, that was what was in the papers. And now you feel this thriving Asian community. Of course, there's the Muslim community, there's a very dynamic gay community. The Jewish community is much more intensive, much more Orthodox is represented much more strongly than when we came, I think. And somehow these independent and varied strains that are in other parts of the country are here now too. And I think it's a lot healthier and a lot more interesting.
What were some of the memorable experiences you've had at Temple Emmanuel?
Well, it's just been one wonderful crescendo of events, Temple. It was one of those matches that, Benjet. It was the place that I somehow needed to be at that point in my life, and what I had to give suited what the temple wanted. And that lasted for 25 years. I had the most wonderful, um, devoted volunteer staff who were helping me when I had a dream I wanted to do this piece, or I wanted to start on this project or start this concert series. They always said, let's try it. How can we help, And gave it their all. And the choir, most wonderful choir, learning all my music and growing and thriving and feeding back this wonderful energy and support and admiration that gave me, because I had so much insecurity, it gave me inner strength. So it was just a wonderful match. It's hard to pick out. I mean, when we first came, did a wonderful program on the American Bicentennial, which I'll never forget, which was sponsored by Brotherhood and Sisterhood. I don't know if you were in that one. And we had a Tobian with the red, white, and blue, and a wonderfully original playlet with all the kids from the religious school and the choir and Sisterhood and Brotherhood people participating. It was just a gala evening, and we had a wonderful program with Rabbi Olin I'll never forget. It was called At Grandmother's Knee, and it was all about the Yiddish influence of American popular culture. And Levi did some readings from Isaac Bashevis Singer and from the biography of Marc Chagall. The choir sang Yiddish pieces, and we had a small ensemble that played Copland's Vitebsk Trio and Prokofiev Overture on Hebrew themes. It was all kind of Eastern Europe brought over here. And it was just a really, I had written a narration that threaded it all through. It was such an exciting program. And then over the years we did so many wonderful choir programs, and also through Showcase. Different, interesting, stimulating, provocative programs that I think they were real enrichment for the whole community.
And what do you see as the state of Jewish music in America now?
That's a double-edged question,
I'm sure it is.
and a difficult one. If you ask about the state of Jewish music in the synagogue, that's a cause for concern right now, because in the Reform movement, the turn away from choirs, from formality in music, from the performance of pieces composed for choir by accomplished, sophisticated composers, that's all been being rejected and being replaced by much more simple melodies that the congregation can pick up just like that, because they're not a lot to remember. They repeat themselves so much. And it's not that I'm against participatory services. I believe everybody has to participate for the service to be really meaningful to them. You can't be a spectator at a worship service and come away from it having been changed or moved or transformed, which is what a worship service needs to do for people. But on the other hand, if the worship service is all totally participatory, then there's nothing elevating, to my way of thinking about it. It's it doesn't enter into a sphere of holiness that is aesthetically pleasing, and I really miss that. That's something that I have to have when I have am part of a service. There has to be, in other words, both elements present. And Reform right now is going towards jettisoning the whole more serious formal part of things towards a total participation, hand clapping, yai da 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 kind of stuff. So from that kind of point of view, I'm depressed and disappointed about it. On the other hand, I think we have to take a broader view of this. I think that these things are cyclical. We may be at the bottom of a trend right now that's a rejection of those very formal services and reform of the 1950s, you know, and they've come circled this way, and that ultimately there'll be a desire for something more elevated and more demanding intellectually and aesthetically from the congregation, and it will be responded to. In terms of Jewish music in the concert world, it's fantastic what's happening right now. There's this incredible revival of klezmer, you know, and that's filtered into the concert world. Jewish composers are represented way disproportionately to their number in the overall population. And you look at the leading composers, which had started from Gershwin and Bernstein and Copland, all being Jewish, and in this generation, similarly, the composers are Jewish, and many of them are Jews who are investigating their Jewish heritage and not afraid to present it, to interpret it in the concert world to a general mixed public.
And when you perform, how do you select what you want to perform for a particular concert?
You mean if I perform as a pianist or a conductor or a choir with the choir?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the first thing in performance is variety. You need to offer the audience something that changes with every piece so that they're absorbed. You can't have... Gosh, I remember when we went to Amsterdam. Ruth, were you on that trip? We sang in the synagogue in Amsterdam, and then I understood why people thought, oh God, we'll never host a Jewish choir. Because this synagogue choir sang one slow, lugubrious, melancholy piece after another. It was like 6. You were sitting through them going, oh. And I thought, well, you know, if that's what Jewish choirs have to offer, I wouldn't hire a Jewish choir to be in my concert series either. But for me, there have to be some fast numbers, some upbeat numbers, peppy numbers, and also what I said in terms of the stimulation. One has to try to raise an audience's level. You cannot do all light, popular things that are absolutely easy listening. There has to be one or two pieces that present a challenge, or that relate to history, or that there's a stretch that people have to try to understand them, or try to is somehow respond to the style of them, because the style is not American pop folk music, you know. And I see that as part of the responsibility of any programmer. We're an age that throws history out the window, you know. And we are not, you just got that report in the newspapers about how high school students, they know nothing of the past, you know. I think as music educators and as programmers, and of course with our history of Jewish music, we can't just say, Lewandowski's old-fashioned, Sulzer's old-fashioned. We're not going to do them. I think we have to say, what is the most beautiful work of Lewandowski, and how can we present it the most lovingly and beautifully and meaningfully? Put in program notes, maybe give an interpretation in words beforehand, and let an audience know that in our Jewish tradition there are giants who are being ignored.
I read that in 1994 you were awarded the first Leon Rabin Award in Dallas.
Yes.
For contributions to Jewish culture.
Yes, I was very honored to receive that.
And what do you think about the current state of Jewish culture in Dallas, anyway?
Well, I'm very hopeful about it. I think that it's all on the upswing right now, and there's a lot more interest in it. I think our concert series at Temple, which perhaps it was the first, and has continued for over 13 years and been extremely successful, has been a model for the JCC has started one, Shereth Israel has started one, I know Tefereth has had a series of concerts where they bring in Israeli cantors and so on. The Jewish festival at the Meyerson is an auspicious thing, the once-a-year festival there. And for instance, the concert the choir gave at SMU, we had that Library of Congress exhibition, the traveling exhibition from the Library of Congress, and the choir did a concert at SMU where we played some of the pieces that were in manuscript in this collection. And drew a big crowd. It was a wonderful thing. So I think that this is a kind of a swell of Jewish culture that's coming up, and it's heartening. It's a good thing.
And what changes would you like to see happen as this phenomenon occurs?
Well, as I mentioned before, I would like to see quality be to the fore. The pandering to what is easiest and most accessible is upsetting. The derivative quality of Jewish music, where it's copies of Christian pop music, you know, one could just change the words and it would be exactly the same style, that, you know, we Jews have such a 2,000, 3,000 year history. We have biblical chants that are so beautiful and touching. Why should we have to write music that's like Christian, 20th century Christian pop music? I mean, it should be distinctively Jewish, because it should draw on Jewish sources more, you know? The problem is, if the Jewish composers don't know their source material, well, they'll just draw on pop culture. That's all they grow up with. So education is part of the whole thing, that we have to educate people in terms of Jewish music, and then the temples, the rabbis, the community has to call it forth by commissions, by concerts, by putting value on this cultural effort from the top, from the authority level. You know?
And what's next for you? Composing, performing, traveling?
Well, I don't think traveling. We're staying here to usher in the birth of our first grandchild, so that's a great joy. I think we'll be here most of the summer. I'm going to continue writing. I'll continue at SMU as a full-time professor. I'll be continuing as a consultant for the showcase series of the Temple. And it's like at the end of that recent movie with Tom Hanks where he was on the desert island. And they said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'll wait and see what the tide brings in." So that's sort of what we all do in a way, but I do that. I say, well, maybe there'll be a phone call, maybe there'll be mail, maybe a commission, maybe an offer to perform. Whatever the tide brings in, I'll try to do it my best.
Can you tell us a little bit about your family today? We know that you're going to be a grandfather soon.
Yes, it's very exciting. It's our first grandchild, and those of you who are watching who have grandchildren, I guess you know how exciting this moment is. And everybody says it's the best thing that can happen and the best thing in life to do. So we've waited a long time. My sister in Israel had 4 children, and immediately they got married young and started reproducing. And my brother had right away grandchildren. We waited a long time, so we're very excited about this.
And who were your role models when you were growing up?
That's a hard one. You know, in a strange way, I felt spiritually connected to the people that I practiced. And somehow, playing Beethoven and playing Schubert and playing Brahms, they were presences in my life. They were people who they worked to their very hardest to be the very best that they could, and not be satisfied, and to keep working away, and to communicate their hearts. And what they gave to me is a kind of isolated outsider in sense to my high school world, which was not into music nor into Jewish studies nor into anything. They gave me solace, and they gave me a sense of support, of real support. And I always wanted to be like them. I wanted to write music that was on a level of theirs. Not that I ever could, but they were the ideals that I aspired to.
Mm-hmm. And you've done so many things and have so many awards. What's most special to you?
Well, the most special thing to me is facing my own self and trying to bring it forth in terms of sound. And when I can do that, everything else pales. Because I was brought up in a Jewish home that was, just like all Boston Jews, emphasizing achievement, accomplishment, prizes, awards, stature. It didn't help that Leonard Bernstein was also from Boston, and look what he did, And I lived with that my whole life. And only now have I come to the conclusion that facing myself at my desk and trying to write music and trying to conquer my inner fears and to be the very best that I can be, when I do that, that's the most satisfying thing in my life right now.
Thank you. Is there anything that you would like to add that we haven't talked about?
Tell us about your wife. She has a great history.
Bonnie is my pillar and my rock and my source of strength. And she's been my helpmeet, my friend in the best sense of the word. It's just been a gift from God, my relationship with her. So I'm thankful that we met. We met in Aspen. She was a voice student of Jenny Terrell, and I was studying with Mio, as I said. But as part of my scholarship for composition lessons, I had to accompany a certain number of voice lessons, and I accompanied for her, and that's how we met. And we've been through a lot, as every couple has, 40 years. But I'm so thankful that our relationship has kept growing and that we both as individuals have grown. And thank God we've not grown in different directions. That's what's so good, that we still feel as close or more close than we always did. So.
Any questions that we have?
When did you start at Temple? What is that?
I started in 74. That's when I came over from Jerusalem.
Well, thank you so much.
You got enough material, you think?
Oh,
I think